Hello everyone, and welcome back to Game Easy Roll Good. And man, we need to talk about ranged weapons in the Dungeons & Dragons Player's Handbook for 2024. We saw some worrying signals in the playtest, and it didn't really get better. I don't think at any point it got better, but we're going to take a look. This might be a longer video, so let's jump right into it. So I want to talk about the 4 verticals of dealing damage as it pertains to ranged weapons. If you watched my melee weapons video, this will sound familiar to you. So these are the 4 different avenues that you have to increase your damage with martial weapons. That is damage dealt, number of attacks, your accuracy, and your critical hit chance. For ranged weapons in dealing damage, ranged weapons can range from literally 1 damage with the blowgun to 1d12 with the musket. Most of them range in the d6 to d8 range. Ranged weapons are more susceptible to resistances and immunities because they only deal piercing damage. The only exception is the sling, which has bludgeoning damage, but it's only a 1d4 weapon. They have limited access to different masteries. Most of them have Vex or Slow. I think there's Push as well, but that might be it. There might be one I'm missing, but they don't really have that many. And lastly, the Sharpshooter feat, which was the premier damage feat in 2014, has been nerfed into the ground. I do believe that it did need to be nerfed a bit, but not like this. The heavy ranged weapons can use the Great Weapon Master feat, but at what cost? And we're going to take a look at that later in the video. Number of attacks, only hand crossbows can get an extra attack as a bonus action naturally. Not, certain class features might enable one, but naturally as just weapons, it is not available unless you have a hand crossbow because it is a light weapon, and the light weapon property lets you make a bonus action attack. Crossbow Expert lets you add your ability modifier to that bonus action attack. Ranged weapons don't have the Nick Mastery, so you can't use the Nick Mastery as a purely ranged character. You can do it if you use a scimitar to make one of your attacks and then push your bonus action attack from the light property from your bonus action to your action. But this is basically just strictly worse because you're just making an attack for the same amount of damage with a lower chance to hit. And there's still no way to attack as a reaction with a ranged weapon outside of maybe some specific features that some classes or whatever might have. Going into accuracy, this is the one place where ranged weapons kind of have a little bit of an edge. They get +2 attack rolls with the archery fighting style. The Sharpshooter feat still ignores 1/2 and 3/4 cover. It's harder to get advantage on ranged attacks, but the Vex Mastery helps. However, the Vex Mastery is only on the weaker ranged weapons, and again, we'll look into that a little bit later. And there's more ways in 2024 for melee characters to knock enemies prone, which will force disadvantage on your ranged attacks. There's no way currently for ranged weapons to ignore the disadvantage from a creature being prone. And if prone is going to be as common as I feel it's going to be, especially if you have a table where people really like their melee characters, it's going to feel bad making any sort of ranged attack. It doesn't matter if it's with a weapon or with a spell. For critical chance, not much to say here. You still have the base critical chance of 5% that every attack has in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. But one note here is that the Piercer feat, which again, it's a decent feat for ranged weapons. It's one of the only feats that you can grab to increase your damage with ranged weapons. It does grant an extra damage die on a critical hit, so that's worth mentioning. All right, going into the changes to relevant feats in 2024, we have the Crossbow Expert feat to start with. It's a general feat that has a prerequisite of level 4 and a dexterity of 13+. It gives you a ability score increase, increasing your dexterity score by 1 up to a maximum of 20. You can ignore the loading property of the hand crossbow, heavy crossbow, and light crossbow. And additionally, if you're holding a crossbow, you can load a piece of ammunition into it, even if you lack a free hand. So you can be dual wielding hand crossbows, holding one in both hands, and you can still load them with each attack without having to worry about putting one away just to load the crossbow. It does give you the firing and melee benefit, so being within 5 feet of an enemy doesn't impose disadvantage on your attack rolls, specifically with crossbows. And lastly, the dual wielding feature, when you make the bonus action attack of the light weapon property, you can add your ability modifier to the damage of it. So it's basically the 2-weapon fighting feat, the 2-weapon fighting style, specifically for light crossbows, which is only the hand crossbow. So pros of this feat, it grants a +1 to dex. You can also reload without a free hand, which allows you to hold a shield while holding a hand crossbow. It grants you essentially the 2-weapon fighting style bonus, like I just mentioned, for hand crossbows. And the bonus action attack that was in this feat in 2014 is now baked into the light property. So all in all, this feat is essentially the same as it was, except that it gives you a +1 dexterity. However, let's look at some of the negatives of this feat. So the dual wielding feature only works with hand crossbows because it is the only crossbow that is light or has a light property. You know, the light crossbow, it does not have the light property. Using the bonus action attack requires a second hand crossbow because the light property does say you need to attack with a different light weapon. So you need a different hand crossbow specifically. Hand crossbows don't have the Nick Mastery. I did mention that before. So you can't free up your bonus action this way without using a melee weapon. And you don't really want to do that unless you really want to. I mean, you can play how you like. You can be this sort of swashbuckler with a scimitar and a hand crossbow and play melee that way. Perfectly fine. But if you want to be a strictly ranged character, this isn't the way you want to go. And because weapons can now be swapped on each attack, so as part of the attack, you can pull out a weapon or stow a weapon either before or after the attack. So because you can do this now, which is not how we could do it in 2014, you can kind of already ignore the loading property by just switching crossbows on each attack. So let's say I'm a level 5 fighter. I'm using a longbow. Well, not a long, let's say a heavy crossbow. I can have my heavy crossbow in hand at the start of my turn. I can load it, fire a shot, stow it at the end of that attack. At the beginning of my next attack, I can draw out a different heavy crossbow, load it, and shoot it again. Because you can only fire, the loading property says that you can only fire once with that weapon, regardless of how many times you can normally attack. But you can just switch to a different weapon and effectively ignore the loading property. So, this will be different when you have a magical, heavy crossbow or whatever it might be. You're going to want to be using that weapon, so you're going to want to be ignoring the loading property. But before you get a magic ranged weapon, you can work around it. So basically, before you get a magic weapon, this feat gives you +1 dex. That's basically it, right? If you're using a long enough range weapon, you shouldn't be within 5 feet most of the time. Dual wielding doesn't apply to all crossbows, and the ignore loading only matters once you get one singular magic weapon. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. Now we're looking at Great Weapon Master, and I know what we're thinking. We're looking at Great Weapon Master with ranged weapons. Well, okay, so it's a general feat. You need to be level 4+. You need to have a strength of 13+ to take this feat. It gives you an ability score increase to your strength +1 up to a maximum of 20. It gives you heavy weapon mastery, so when you hit a creature with a weapon that has the heavy property, as a part of the attack action on your turn, you can cause that weapon to deal extra damage to the target. The extra damage equals your proficiency bonus. And it has a hew feature that says, immediately after you score a critical hit with a melee weapon or reduce a creature to 0 hit points with one, you can make one attack with the same weapon as a bonus action. So it's really interesting because we're going to take a look. Again, pros, all heavy ranged weapons that don't have the ability to add... all heavy ranged weapons don't have the... my gosh, what am I saying? All heavy ranged weapons don't have the ability to attack outside of their attack action. So the extra damage from the heavy weapon mastery applies to 100% of their attacks, right? The best and this feat is the best and easiest source to get extra damage for any ranged weapon that can use it. I mean, if you're a ranger, then you have you have Hunter's Mark to add damage to it, but just class agnostic. If you're not thinking about any specific class, this is the best way that you can add damage to your ranged attacks. The last bonus here is that it scales with proficiency bonus, which keeps it relevant throughout the entire game. Going into negatives, and there are plenty, it requires 13 strength, which as a ranged character, you're not usually going to have, or you didn't usually think that you needed to have it. It buffs strength with the ability score increase, which again isn't useful for ranged weapons. And the final feature, the hew feature that gives you the bonus attack on a critical hit or dropping an enemy to 0, doesn't work with ranged weapons. However, you'll see that this feat is still very, very good for the weapons that can use it. I did want to point out that to ensure that you have a 13 strength before level 4, if you wanted to take this feat at level 4, a point buy spread for a ranged fighter might look like the following. Here are just some examples. Again, you can spread it however you want. This would assume that you take a +2 to dex and a +1 to strength. but you can distribute it however you want, whichever gives you the stats that you're going for with your character. But I just wanted to kind of dispel the illusion that it might require a bunch of sacrifice to get a 13 strength on a character that wants to focus on dex. It's not that big of a deal, but it does require a little bit of sacrifice, but not as much as you might think. Moving on, we're going to go to Sharpshooter. A general feat, again, level 4 plus required, dexterity of 13 plus required. It gives you an ability score increase, +1 to dex to a maximum of 20. Bypasses cover, so your ranged attacks ignore half and 3/4 cover. Firing and melee, so this is new. You can be within 5 feet of an enemy, and it does impose disadvantage on your attack rolls with ranged weapons. And then long shots, attacking at long range doesn't impose disadvantage on your attack rolls with ranged weapons. So positives, it grants +1 to dex now. It didn't do that before. There's no disadvantage while on enemies within 5 feet. That's new. And the range extension on the long shots, that can be relevant for ranged weapons that have a shorter minimum range, such as the hand crossbow. However, the cons are there's no actual damage that's added with this feat anymore. All it does is kind of make up for a lot of the downsides to having a ranged weapon in the first place. And depending on your table, the second con here, depending on your table, cover rules don't really come up that often. I personally have a ranged character currently in one of my campaigns, and we do have a lot of martial characters in that, so I'm constantly firing through my party to get to the enemies pretty often. So the Sharpshooter was, even the old Sharpshooter feat was of benefit to me just to be able to ignore the half cover, 3/4 cover penalties. However, in a lot of cases, it doesn't come up. Like, it doesn't come off as often as you like, or as often as you would think, but when it does come up, you like it. But most of the time, it's not relevant. Lastly, the long shots feature is irrelevant in most cases for weapons that naturally have a long minimum range, such as the longbow and the heavy crossbow, which is like 80, and then I think it's 80 for the heavy crossbow and maybe like 120 for the longbow. Most maps aren't even that big. There are maps that are very large, even within published modules, but the vast majority of the time, you're not even going to have 80 to 100 feet to work with on the map. Let's move on. I want to take a quick look at Piercer numbers because I am going to talk about Piercer. The Piercer feat is unchanged in the 2024 Player's Handbook. To calculate the benefit from re-rolling our weapon damage once per turn, we will re-roll any value less than the average result for that die. While this is the mathematically correct way to roll, many players, including myself, are more risk-averse, so the differences are going to be small, but it's enough to be insignificant. So you don't have to worry about like, oh, I should start re-rolling at 5 on a D10 or whatever. Re-roll wherever you're comfortable with when you're re-rolling your damage dice. The table below lists the average increase from re-rolling each die when equal to or below the given amount and using the new roll. The difference will be added after the number of attacks is calculated, but before accuracy is applied. So the benefit from Piercer for a D6 when you're re-rolling on 3 or less is plus 0.75. For D8, it's +1. For D10, it's 0.125. For D12, it's 0.15. And if you want to check the math, you can go to this Any Dice link. I found some dude on Reddit from 10 years ago who created the program, so you can double check that work. But it checks out. But if you want to double check, you're free to do it. So ranged weapons in the Player's Handbook 2024. Here are our assumptions. So again, much like the melee weapon video, we're going to compare the following builds with a fighter who has no subclass up to level 11. We will compare the 2014 variant human with crossbow expert, sharpshooter, piercer in an ability score increase in that order. For 2024 builds, we're going to look at a hand crossbow with crossbow expert, piercer, and mage slayer. And when I say mage slayer, this can be any feat that increases your dex by 1. We're also going to compare the heavy crossbow with crossbow expert, great weapon master, and an ability score increase. We're going to compare the 2024 longbow with piercer, sharpshooter, and mage slayer. We're going to compare the 2024 longbow with great weapon master, piercer, and an ASI. And lastly, the 2024 musket with gunner from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, which is basically crossbow expert for guns, as well as piercer and mage slayer. We are also going to assume that we start at 15 dex at level 1. The 2014 variant human will get +1 to a 16. In any 2024 species will get +2 up to a 17. We're going to be ignoring origin feats and ignore any situational benefits from sharpshooter, such as ignoring cover. We're going to assume the archery fighting style, of course. We're going to ignore all masteries. The chance to hit calculations, I just wanted to include these here because I'm not going to go super heavy into the actual formulas like I did in the melee weapon. So I just want to put them all here on this page so that you can see what I'm doing. And then we're just going to show numbers on each level. So the target AC is going to equal the average AC for a monster of the same challenge rating at each level, according to the 2014 Monster Manual. So this means for a level 1 fighter, we're going to assume a CR1 average armor class. Level 11 will have an average, the average armor level for a CR11 creature in the Monster Manual. That's how we're doing that. There is the DPR calculation if you want to double check, and then the crit chances just for transparency there. I mean, we can all get the same results, but I just wanted to put everything here on the assumptions. So let's move on. Level 1, here is everything. I'm hiding a lot of the statistics here, but here's a lot of the most important things. At level 1, we can see that the 2014 variant human with the crossbow expert to begin with is easily ahead of every other build that I mentioned. I'm not separating the two different longbow builds right now because it doesn't matter because they don't have any feats to differentiate themselves. But unsurprisingly, the crossbow expert variant human from 2014 is ahead simply because it's making more attacks. Okay, moving on to level 4. So here are the numbers. Now I'm including Sharpshooter because the variant human from 2014 has Sharpshooter. I'm going to break out their damage separately because there's no way that a 2024 build without any extra features is going to beat the old Sharpshooter, but I want to show it just to compare what we're losing. But now we're separating out Longbow with Piercer versus Longbow with Great Weapon Master. So let's see what the results look like now. So all we have is extra feats. Not everyone has an adjusted dex bonus because of either the 2014 feats aren't half feats and the Longbow took the Great Weapon Master feat, which gives strength and not dex. But let's take a look at the results. So now we're seeing that the 2024 hand crossbow with crossbow expert, now that it's adding its dexterity bonus to the damage of its bonus action attack, it's actually pulled slightly ahead of the 2014 crossbow expert with Sharpshooter without Sharpshooter. Of course, with Sharpshooter, it's going to smoke everyone. But hand crossbow at level 4, using the 2024 rules, is decent. Otherwise, it's better than the crossbow expert in 2014 without Sharpshooter. Moving on to level 5, now everyone has extra attack. That is the only change. Let's take a look now. So the 2024 hand crossbow with crossbow expert still doing very well just because it's making the most number of attacks. Longbow with Great Weapon Master, it's kind of in third place, which is interesting to see because we know that Great Weapon Master scales pretty well with more attacks. However, the musket with Gunner just has a bigger damage die, to be honest. It's a D8 to a D12, and apparently that's enough to make a difference. Also, the dex bonus is the difference here as well. So it's slightly less accurate. It's not adding quite as much damage to every attack. It's +1 down. But again, Great Weapon Master isn't making up for that, comparing the dice damage difference. Now we're going to move on to level 6. Level 6, the 2014 variant human now has Piercer. The 2024 hand crossbow now has crossbow expert and Piercer. The 2024 heavy crossbow has crossbow expert and Great Weapon Master. The 2024 longbow with Piercer now has Sharpshooter, which again does almost nothing except for +1 dex. The 2024 longbow with Great Weapon Master now has Piercer, and the 2024 musket with Gunner now has Piercer as well. This is the only difference, except for the 2024 longbow with Great Weapon Master now has 18 dexterity, so its bonus goes up to 4. Here are the results. We can see now that the heavy crossbow with crossbow expert and Great Weapon Master is pulling ahead at number 1. It is slightly ahead of the hand crossbow from 2024. We can see that the 2014 variant human without Sharpshooter is actually falling pretty far behind. The longbow with Piercer without Great Weapon Master is dead last. The longbow with Great Weapon Master is in second place, with the musket with Gunner right behind it. Actually, the musket with Gunner and the hand crossbow with from 2024 are kind of neck and neck, to be honest. All right, moving on to level 8. Here are the changes. So the 2014 variant human now has an ability score increase. Again, this is the last feat we're getting before the level 11. So this is an ability score increase to get our dex as high as possible. We're still only able to get it to a +4. 2024 hand crossbow now has Mage Slayer to get its dexterity to 20. 2024 heavy crossbow with crossbow expert and great weapon master is now just using a flat ability score increase for +2 to dex to get to 20. 2024 longbow with piercer and sharpshooter and is now taking mage slayer to get to 20. 2024 longbow with great weapon master with piercer is now taking a full ability score increase to get to 20. And the 2024 musket with gunner and piercer is taking mage slayer to get to 20. Everyone's just getting to 20 at level 8. That's the only significant change at this level. The results look pretty similar to where we were last time. So we can see that the heavy crossbow with crossbow expert and great weapon master specifically is the big change maker here, is that it has the highest damage die and it has great weapon master. Pretty far ahead of everyone else. The hand crossbow with crossbow expert, piercer, and mage slayer for 2024. Honestly, not that far behind. Neither is the longbow with great weapon master. The longbow with piercer is interestingly further behind. It is now in last place compared to the 2014 crossbow expert variant human. Not by much, but it is last, and it's the newer build, so they should be doing more damage, at least, not including the old sharpshooter. Well, let's continue. We're going to move on to level 9, and we know from our melee video that level 9 is just our proficiency bonus going up by 1. There's no other changes at this level other than great weapon master is doing slightly more damage now, so here's how that pans out. So now the heavy crossbow is still doing easily the most damage of all these weapons, not including sharpshooter, of course, the old sharpshooter. But now longbow with great weapon master is pulling ahead to second place, followed by the 2024 hand crossbow, followed by gunner, and now the 2014 variant human is in second to last place. Again, not including the old sharpshooter, because again, old sharpshooter beats everything all the time, doesn't matter. Unless it's on like very high armor class, but even then that might be, you might have to get pretty high before that becomes relevant. So let's go to our final level. This is level 11. Level 11, the main thing that changes here, the only thing that changes here is that everyone gets one more attack during their attack action. This benefits our great weapon master users because that adds that damage to your attacks during your attack action. This also benefits the old sharpshooter. But again, we're not really looking at the old sharpshooter, we're just kind of looking at it to see what we lost. But here are the numbers for level 11, the final one that we're looking at for this fighter. The heavy crossbow with great weapon master is far and ahead, the best, especially when firing at advantage. It's followed pretty closely by the longbow with great weapon master. And then after that, it's not really that close. I mean, the hand crossbow is fine. The musket with gunner is fine, but muskets aren't heavy weapons. That surprises me. But if you compare that to the old sharpshooter, I mean, the heavy crossbow with advantage, it's not that far behind, to be honest. And as we go, if we're attacking a target that has a higher armor class, that gap might close. But you're still doing technically less damage, but it's not as far apart than I would have thought it would have been. You know what I mean? Again, that -5 to hit counts for a lot, to be honest. So let's move on. Ranged weapons in the Player's Handbook 2024. Let's look at melee versus range. So these are all the numbers from the melee video that I just posted as well. So we have our dual wielding, we have our great weapon, we have our polearm master. I calculated the totals for advantage and I brought the videos from the totals from the video that had advantage and disadvantage, plugged them in here for both level 9 and level 11. And then I'm highlighting polearm master with great weapon master because that was the sort of winner of the melee video. And I'm going to compare that to the heavy crossbow with crossbow expert and great weapon master because that was the winner of this video for the ranged weapons. And I wanted to compare the difference of what is the percentage difference between how they're doing. So at level 9, when you have 2 attacks, so for non-fighters, this is kind of where you can expect to be. The difference when you're attacking normally, either as a polearm master or with the heavy crossbow, is you're going to be doing about 23% less damage as a ranged character. If both of them are attacking at advantage, that you're doing about 30% less damage as a ranged character. And if you're attacking at disadvantage, you're doing about 4% less damage. So if everyone's attacking at disadvantage, you feel great. If not, you're doing, again, about 23 to 30% less damage than your martial companions. At level 11, again, everyone has 3 attacks. The ranged weapon is doing about 18% less damage on a normal attack. The ranged weapon is doing about 22.5% less damage on attacking with advantage, and if both are attacking at disadvantage, then it's about 4.5% less than the melee weapons. Now, Is this fair? Kind of. I still think these numbers are a little high. I would like to see them brought down to maybe like a 10 to 15%, because you are safer when attacking at range. That is a fair thing to say. I don't think they need to be doing as much damage as their martial companions, but I think this gap is still a little too wide, and then it's going to get even wider because the problem with the Topple mastery is that it gives melee wielders or melee weapon users advantage while ranged attackers have disadvantage. So if we compare just the polearm master, which there's at least one polearm that has the Topple mastery. So if we compare the polearm master with the heavy crossbow, which again, these were the two best of each melee versus ranged category. So if the polearm master is attacking with advantage and the heavy crossbow is attacking with disadvantage, the heavy crossbow users now doing on average 53, almost 54% less damage than the martial weapon. At level 11, when they both have 3 attacks, this increases to about 54%. So like 53.7 to 54%, not a big difference. The extra attack doesn't make that much change. But that is a huge gap. And if Topple is going to be so common, if creatures being prone is going to be more common than it was in 2014, and if you have people who like to knock things over already at your table, this is what you have to look forward to as any sort of ranged attacker, regardless of whether it's spells or weapons. And again, weapons typically do more damage than spells unless you're being cheesy. But this is what you have to look forward to, is this huge of a gap between your martial characters and your ranged characters. Again, martial characters needed love, melee characters needed love, but this is a problem to me if it's going to be as popular as I think it's going to be. So let's continue. We're going to relook at the 4 verticals of dealing damage now that we have more context. So for damage dealt, the best ranged weapons, which are the heavy weapons in 2024, rely on a damage feat that largely benefits melee weapons just to try to be competitive, right? The only thing that kept the heavy crossbow and the longbow relevant was the fact that it had Great Weapon Master, which is a feat that's largely designed for heavy melee weapons. But we can use it because the damage bonus applies to any heavy weapon, right? Secondly, heavy crossbows need Crossbow Expert just to function normally once you have extra attack. Technically, this isn't true because, like I said, you can switch between 2 heavy crossbows to kind of work around the loading property. But once your DM gives you a magical heavy crossbow, now you don't want to be switching weapons. Now you want to be able to ignore the loading property. So the dual wielding feature on the Crossbow Expert is irrelevant to anything but hand crossbows. So the heavy crossbow for Crossbow Expert, because it has a long range naturally, so it doesn't really need the disadvantage or ignoring disadvantage within 5 feet. So Crossbow Expert really for heavy crossbows only does +1 dex and ignores the loading property. That's it, most of the time. So if you're not using these heavy ranged weapons, your damage is going to be dramatically lower than an optimized melee character. Even compared to the heavy weapons, the hand crossbow was pretty noticeably behind them. As for number of attacks, the best ranged weapons in 2024 only get however many attacks their class or subclass gives them. In most cases, this is going to be 2. On the plus side, if you're playing a class that has a good bonus action, or you just have a lot of other bonus actions, this isn't actually a big loss. I think this is actually one of the benefits of ranged weapons being able to still do good damage with only their action, is that their action economy is freed up to do other things than attack. As for accuracy, the archery fighting style makes ranged weapons particularly more accurate. This is their only advantage over melee weapons besides being able to attack at a safer distance. But as far as purely damage goes, that's the only advantage they have. Melee weapons have more options for advantage, which is often better than the +2 to hit on normal attacks. Depending on how often your DM brings up cover and how big the maps are, Sharpshooter may or may not be relevant most of the time. A lot of the time, Sharpshooter may be just +1 to dex. Accuracy has diminishing returns as it approaches 95%, since a natural one always misses. So, the closer you are to being at 95% accurate, the less of a damage increase that is for you. So the one avenue that ranged weapons are better at than melee weapons, it doesn't actually increase your damage, it just increases the percentage of your potential damage that you're doing. That's the range's only niche. So that's kind of the problem with ranged weapons, and we'll go a little bit deeper into that on the next slide. But as far as critical chances, again, there are no mundane weapons that have an increased critical range. And this is still just an overall small increase. So even if we're like, hey, can we give ranged weapons an increased crit range somehow to make them, differentiate themselves from melee weapons? You could, but it's still, and it feels good to crit more often, I'm not going to lie, but mathematically it's still just a small increase on average, right? So moving on, diving deeper into this, we're going to look at the 4 verticals as it compares to each kind of playstyle. We have Polearm Master, Great Weapon Master, Sentinel, Crossbow Expert, Sharpshooter, Piercer. So we're evaluating these feats as to how they affect the weapons that they benefit. So Polearm Master specifically increases number of attacks. This gives a reliable bonus action as well as a situational reaction. Great Weapon Master, it has damage that scales with your proficiency bonus, so it scales throughout the game. It also gives a chance for a bonus action attack or on critting or on downing an enemy. This only benefits melee weapons, however. Sentinel gives you a new reaction attack that now stacks with other players who have Sentinel, where it didn't before, so this is even more reliable, and more than one melee player can take it now without feeling like you're conflicting with the other player. But opportunity attacks are specifically melee only. So you can't be in melee range with a crossbow or whatever you want to do and get those sentinel attacks and take a shot at point blank. That would be weird to play that way, so I'm kind of glad it's not that way. But again, this is an advantage that melee weapons have over their ranged counterparts, is that they just have better action economy to attack things than ranged weapons. So Crossbow Expert, the damage increase only works for hand crossbows. The accuracy, the close range disadvantage is situational, and you can play around it most of the time. I'm not that excited usually about the ignoring disadvantage within 5 feet of a creature. I'm usually okay to either just Misty Step away, or if I'm a rogue, I can bonus action disengage, because I'm not using my bonus action for anything else if I'm a ranged character most of the time. Or I can just walk away if I don't think they're going to do that much damage. Again, it's not that big of a deal. That part of the feat doesn't really do it for me. For Sharpshooter, again, it basically just covers accuracy. Ignoring cover may rarely come up. The best ranged weapons in 2024 have a decent minimum range. That's the heavy crossbow and the longbow. So the extended long range, not shooting at disadvantage at long range, might not come up that often. And if you are firing at that range, if the map is big enough that you are able to shoot from 150 feet away or whatever, then it's possible that your melee characters are going to be out of range to even attack for maybe 1 or 2 turns, and in which case it's okay to even be firing at disadvantage because they can't even attack, right? So the advantage here is kind of not even that exciting. Lastly, much like the Crossbow Expert, the close range disadvantage is situational and can be played around. Again, most of the time when I'm playing a ranged character and someone walks up on me, I either just shoot him and shoot at disadvantage, I don't care, or I'll just, again, walk away, or I'll Misty Step. I'm usually planning around how do I get away from someone who tries to get up on me like that. Lastly, there's the Piercer feat for damage dealt. It technically has a very small damage increase once per turn. It's nothing compared to Great Weapon Master. Not saying that it does need to. It's just a pretty simple feat. And it is the only feat of the feats that we covered that increases critical damage. But again, criticals happen 5% of the time, 5 to 10% of the time, depending on how often you can get advantage. So what we can see here is that the vast majority of feats that benefit ranged weapons don't really do anything besides give you +1 dex. They don't add to your damage. They don't give you more attacks. It's really, really disappointing. I was hoping they would do more with these feats to help create very distinct play styles, that the Crossbow Expert would be the crossbow feat, and I mean it still is, but then the Sharpshooter feat might be like the bow feat, and then they might make another feat for specifically guns or anything like that. But we didn't see that. They just kind of nerfed everything for ranged weapons and said, have at it, right? So let's move on. How can this be fixed? The easiest way would be to basically just mirror melee weapons. This would be, for example, give hand crossbow the Nick Mastery to allow them to shift the bonus action attack from the light property to their action. This would help free up their bonus action. I'm not saying you need to give them a bonus action attack. However, you could by extending the dual wielding feat to non-two-handed ranged weapons. This would essentially just limit it to hand crossbows. So you could, again, fire with a hand crossbow, Nick Mastery, fire with a hand crossbow, bonus action, fire with a hand crossbow. That might be too much, but at least give them Nick's Mastery to open up their bonus action. I think that's fair. Doesn't even increase their damage. It just, frees up their action economy a little bit better. Secondly, you can grant ranged weapons with the heavy property the ability to use strength instead of dexterity for attack and damage rolls. That's maybe too wishy. I like that idea because you can, if you look at, war bows, like English war bows that had like huge draw weight of like 200 pounds, 150 pounds, whatever it is, you need to be strong to pull those bows. You're not going to be super dexterous in pulling those bows. You need strength to do that. I think that's cool. Something you can do if you want to homebrew it at your table. But not required, but it would be fine. Because basically what this does is it allows the Great Weapon Master benefits from, wanting to have a 13 strength, from wanting to, add a bonus to your strength when you take the Great Weapon Master feat. It just benefits that. That's my goal here with that. And then lastly, I would extend the bonus action attack from the Great Weapon Master to ranged weapons with the heavy property. Doing these things would bridge the gap between ranged weapons and melee weapons without fully closing it. A lot of the martial weapons still have more attacks per turn. The dual wielder can use bigger weapons if they're really swapping things out. They can, like, especially if they're using strength, they can go up to D10 weapons, whereas a dual wielding crossbow user couldn't do that. So it would close the gap, but it wouldn't. Again, ranged attackers aren't going to be necessarily doing more if you work it out. Let's see here. Yeah, melee dual wielding can still benefit from weapons with higher damage. Yeah, okay, I covered that. Yeah, and then great weapons still generally do more damage and have more attacks through Sentinel and Polearm Master. So yeah, everything I just said. Firearms, unfortunately, are not either light nor heavy, so they don't really fit naturally into any of these feats. So that's kind of an oversight, I think, in the 2024 Player's Handbook. They included muskets and pistols in the weapons table, but they don't really have any specific callouts for them in any classes or in any feats. Strange, but that's the way it is. So I think the biggest thing that if you're going to do anything for ranged weapons, especially if you have characters who like to knock things prone, if creatures being prone is going to be even more common than it was in pre-2024, ranged weapons and ranged spell attacks need a way to ignore disadvantage against prone targets. I would happily take this over the firing and melee feature on the Sharpshooter feat. It's still not adding damage, but we saw that gap was 54% between a melee character with Polearm Master and Great Weapon Master attacking at advantage versus a heavy crossbow using Great Weapon Master firing at disadvantage. That's too big of a gap to not accommodate for. If we want to get really crazy and we want to think outside of D&D, there's, I don't know how many of you know this, but there is a Star Wars 5th edition that is pretty well supported. You can just go to sw5e.com and kind of look into it. It's kind of like, if you've watched Dimension 20, you watched the Starstruck Odyssey season, that's the system that they were using for that season. It's kind of 5e on steroids. They have a lot of real big power scaling there. I'm going to include some weapon properties that are included in Star Wars 5e. I don't know if they originated there. I imagine they might have stolen them from other systems. But I wanted to talk about them here because I think they're very cool. I wish Wizards of the Coast had done something like this for ranged weapons to help differentiate themselves from melee weapons. But I'm going to start with the burst property, and the N next to these is the amount of ammunition that you need to consume to use this property. So burst says when you would make a ranged attack when you would make a ranged weapon attack with a weapon with this property, you can instead spray a 10-foot cube area with ranged shots, consuming ammunition equal to the burst number. So if it's burst 2, I have to use 2 of my ammunition to make this attack. Each creature within the area must make a dexterity saving throw, DC 8, plus your bonus to attacks with the weapon, or take the weapon's normal damage. So it says 8 plus your bonus to attacks with the weapon. So this means archery increases the DC. If you have a +1, 2, 3 weapon, that increases the DC. So it's very similar to making an attack roll. You're not having a lower chance to succeed, to have them fail on the saving throw than it would if you just made an attack, because generally attacks are more reliable than saving throws. And then they take the creatures in the area. So this is basically a small, kind of AoE in a square, a 10-foot square. And they all take the weapon's normal damage. So if you have Great Weapon Master, then they also take the Great Weapon Master damage. So it's a very cool way to kind of just do small AoE in an area. It also says before you use this property, you can declare one creature that would be affected by it. If the creature fails its save, in addition to the weapon's normal damage, it is subjected to any additional effects that would occur on a hit. If you would have advantage on your attack roll, this creature instead has disadvantage on their saving throw. And if you would have disadvantage on your attack roll, the creature instead has advantage on their saving throw. So it balances out that way. And then if you want to, let's say you have the push mastery, let's say you have that on your heavy crossbow, and you want to say, hey, I want to push this specific creature, because you can't push them all, but I want to push this specific creature. So if I hit them, if they fail their saving throw, they still get pushed, even though I'm not making an attack. So it's a very cool thing, very small point blank AoE with, so you can kind of be looking for clusters of enemies around the battlefield. It just really changes the way that a ranged character would look at the battlefield and kind of wanting to be doing different things than their melee counterparts. Penetrating, so penetrating N being the number of ammunition you need to spend, says when you would make a ranged weapon attack with a weapon with this property, you can instead attempt to penetrate and hit a creature behind the target, consuming ammunition equal to the penetrating number. Make an attack roll against the initial target. If the attack hits and there is a creature within 15 feet of that creature directly behind it, and the original attack roll would hit the second creature, it also takes the normal weapon damage. Alternatively, you can use this property to fire at a creature through partial cover. When you do so, you reduce the target's cover by 1 step from 3/4 to half or from half to none, rather than targeting a second creature. So this has two things you can do. You can either fire through a target that's within 15 feet of your initial target, or you can, kind of fire through a hole by basically using more ammunition to kind of take more shots, and you hope one of them gets through, essentially, is how that's kind of playing out in the fantasy. And you can reduce their cover from 1 step to the next. This is honestly more interesting than the firing at long range, or the ignoring cover, of the sharpshooter feat. This is a more interesting way to do that, in my opinion. So if you want to use that, you can use that with your ranged weapons as a boon to your ranged weapon attackers to make them feel a little better about doing less damage in 2024. Lastly, there's Rapid, and Rapid might be too strong in 5th edition. Again, the power scaling in Star Wars 5e is pretty big, but let's take a look at what Rapid says. Rapid says, when you would make a ranged attack with a weapon with this property, you can instead unload on a single target, consuming ammunition equal to the Rapid number. The target must make a dexterity saving throw, DC 8 plus your attack bonus with this weapon. On a failed save, roll the weapon's damage dice twice and add them together, adding relevant modifiers as normal, and subjecting the target to any additional effects that would occur on a hit. If you would have advantage on your attack roll, the creature has disadvantage on the save. If you have disadvantage on your attack roll, the creature has advantage on the save. So basically what you're doing is you're forcing a critical hit. It's not technically a critical hit. You're just doing double damage. You're consuming a certain number of ammunition to do it. You're just unloading on them, forcing them to make a saving throw. And if they fail to save, then they take double damage. And they take all the normal effects that would come with it. So the push mastery, sneak attacks, I don't know if you can smite on a ranged weapon. I don't think you can. But any additional effects, you can just pile onto that attack. And, there are going to be some cases where maybe, a plate wearer has like 22 AC, but they have +0 to their dexterity, saving throw. So you can just use this to kind of drill into them. I think all of these options are really cool. I don't know that they necessarily bridge any of the gaps from melee weapons to ranged weapons in 2024 Dungeons and Dragons. However, I just think they're really interesting, and they allow a ranged character to look at the battlefield a different way. Penetrating, you want to change position to, again, align people up. Burst, you're looking for pockets of enemies. Rapid lets you, focus on one big target when you're facing, a single boss encounter. And if you keep track of ammunition in your game, this is a kind of an interesting game to play for the ranged character, to like, how many times can I do these before I run out, especially if I'm in a position where I can't get to a town and restock. So I kind of need to play that game. So I think that's all I have for you guys today. Yeah. So that's the state of ranged weapons in Player's Handbook 2024. It's not great. You can still play it. Just expect to be outshined pretty easily by all of your melee companions, pretty much regardless of what they're doing, unless they're really memeing it and kind of just being bad. I'm not saying being bad to be, derogative, but, if they're not taking it seriously, they might do less damage than you. But if they're even trying a little bit, they're going to be doing more damage than a ranged character, unfortunately. Again, the heavy crossbow with Great Weapon Master is very good. The longbow with Great Weapon Master is very good, but you have to build yourself a very specific way to do that. Hopefully we see some changes in future publications, future supplements from Wizards of the Coast to kind of make up for this. If not, try to make up your own stuff and help out your players who want to fulfill their fantasy of being a ranged attacker. If you liked this video, please take the time to like it. Let me know what you think about the state of ranged weapons in 2024. If there's anything I missed that maybe I should have accounted for. Again, individual builds might be able to make ranged weapons shine in a particular way, but this is again just base rules, base weapons, naked fighter, nothing else. It's not great. Again, let me know what you think in the comments. If you want to see more of these videos, please take the time to subscribe. I'm probably not going to do a video this heavy, not for a while at least. I think my last 3 videos have been very math heavy. I want to do some funner stuff that doesn't take as long to do. But I hope you're looking forward to that. I hope to see you next time. If not, thank you.